All right, let's dive into this one. Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish.
All right.
So this is going to be a deep dive into some pretty, I don't know, intense ideas.
Big ideas.
Big ideas.
Yeah.
About how punishment has changed over time and how it's linked to power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know this could be a really tough read, honestly, but I think we're going to make it interesting.
Yeah.
For everyone, but especially.
Well, and I think, Foucault is one of those thinkers that, once you read him, you can't unsee the things that he shows you about the world.
Yeah.
So it's worth the effort.
It is worth the effort. And I think, for a learner like you, who's always, up for a challenge and up for expanding your knowledge, I think this is going to be a really fascinating journey.
I agree.
So to start off, Foucault begins with this incredibly vivid and honestly pretty disturbing description of a public execution in 18th century France.
Right.
He talks about this guy named Damiens.
Mm-hmm.
And the torture that he endured is just, horrific.
Yeah. It's graphic for sure.
Yeah.
But Foucault's using that gruesome scene to kind of illustrate a point, right,
Yeah.
about how punishment functioned in pre-modern Europe.
Right.
It was about public spectacle.
Totally.
Inflicting pain on the body.
Yeah.
And really demonstrating the absolute power of the sovereign.
Yeah. And what I think is so interesting is that they would talk about, people would actually, admire the executioner's skill.
Yeah, it's almost...
And carrying out this torture.
Like an art form, right?
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah, it just shows you, how differently they thought about punishment back then.
Totally different. It was a totally different, conception of the body, of, pain and suffering. And the purpose of punishment, it wasn't simply about sort of causing suffering.
Right.
It was a performance, a display of power, anything to see.
Right. And then, as we move into the 19th century, things start to change. Punishment moves away from these public displays.
Yeah.
And it becomes more about reforming the criminal's soul.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Prisons become the primary form of punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus shifts to discipline and rehabilitation.
It seems more humane on the surface, right?
Yeah, totally.
But Foucault's argument is that this shift wasn't about being nicer.
Right.
It was about new and arguably more insidious forms of power taking hold.
Okay, so let's dive into this idea of discipline.
Right.
This is a word that, Foucault uses a lot.
A lot.
Could you break it down for us?
Sure.
Yeah.
Discipline for Foucault goes beyond simply following rules. It's about this meticulous control of the body and mind, shaping individuals to become docile and useful members of society.
Makes me think about how schools use timetables and exams and rankings.
Right.
It's all about molding students into this certain mold.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. And Foucault's argument is that this disciplinary power extends far beyond as schools.
Right.
It's present in factories, hospitals, the military.
Right.
It's woven into the fabric of modern society.
So we're talking about a system of power that's shaping our behavior in all these different areas of our life without us even, maybe realizing it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a scary thought.
It is, yeah. And I think one of the most striking examples that Foucault uses to illustrate this concept is the panopticon, which is a prison designed by the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham.
Now, this panopticon thing sounds like something straight out of a dystopian sci-fi movie or something.
It does.
What is the deal with it?
So picture a circular prison with a central watchtower in the middle, and the prisoners' cells are arranged around the perimeter, so they're all visible from the central tower.
Okay.
The key is that the prisoners never know if they're actually being watched.
Right.
Right. So you can imagine
that's
kind of the psychological effect of that.
That's really creepy. Yeah. That's you always...
someone's eyes are always on you, but you can't see them.
Yeah. So what was, Foucault's fascination with this prison design?
Well, for Foucault, the panopticon wasn't just, a quirky prison blueprint.
Right.
It was a powerful symbol of how disciplinary power functions in society as a whole.
Okay.
Right. So the feeling of constant surveillance, whether real or imagined,
Yeah.
leads to self-control and conformity.
That makes me think about like social media and how, you're constantly aware of like potentially being watched, judged, it can really influence how you present yourself online.
It really can. And it raises these interesting questions of like, are we all living in some kind of digital panopticon?
Right. It's kind of a mind-blowing thought when you think about it.
It is.
But Foucault also talks about delinquency.
Right.
And how it's not just about like big-time criminals.
Right.
How does that fit into this whole...
Yeah, so for Foucault, delinquency is about behavior that deviates from social norms, right? Behavior that becomes subject to control and regulation.
Okay.
And he argues that there's this connection between the control of delinquency and the interest of the ruling class.
So it's not just about punishing wrongdoing, it's also about...
It's about maintaining a certain social order that benefits those in power.
Okay, so like using the idea of delinquency to maintain control over those who don't like fit neatly into the prescribed social order.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where Foucault brings in this fascinating real-life example.
Okay.
The criminal Lacenaire who...
Yeah, I was wondering about him.
Right.
Yeah.
Who became a sort of celebrity in his time.
It's almost like he blurred the lines between crime and entertainment.
Totally.
Right.
So Lacenaire embodies what Foucault calls the aestheticization of crime.
Okay.
His case became a source of fascination for the upper classes,
Mm-hmm.
even as real-world delinquency was being used to reinforce
their power.
Their power and control, right?
Yeah, and that's, I mean...
It's a disturbing thought.
It's a really disturbing thought.
Yeah.
Like, those in power need that criminal element, both to, like, justify their authority.
Right.
And to, like, provide a source of, like, spectacle and distraction.
Right. It's this complex and unsettling aspect of how power operates in society.
This is a lot to absorb.
It is.
But we're really starting to see how, like, Foucault's ideas about punishment go way beyond just, like, prisons and legal codes.
Totally.
He's really getting at something much deeper about the nature of power itself.
That's exactly right. And I think that's what makes discipline and punish such a powerful and enduring work, It forces us to question our assumptions about how power functions in our lives and our society as a whole.
This is already making me see things in a new light.
Yeah.
And I'm eager to hear more.
Yeah.
About how these ideas play out in the rest of the book.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, so we've been talking about how Foucault sees these, like subtle systems of power at work in things like prisons and schools, but he
doesn't stop there.
He doesn't stop there, does he?
No, not at all.
Foucault's analysis extends to the very fabric of modern society.
Right.
He's interested in how these mechanisms of control become embedded in our everyday lives.
It's almost like he's saying, like, power isn't just something imposed on us from above, but something that we kind of internalize and, like, reproduce through our own actions.
Yeah. And this leads us to one of Foucault's, I think, most insightful points.
Okay.
Which is this link between power and knowledge.
Okay.
He argues that they're inextricably intertwined, constantly shaping and reinforcing in each other.
That sounds a bit abstract. Could you give us like a real world example?
Sure.
Yeah.
So think about the rise of scientific disciplines like criminology or psychiatry in the 19th century. Right. So these fields generated new ways of classifying and understanding criminal behavior.
Okay. So like instead of seeing criminals as just like evil, we start to view them as...
products of their environment, their psychology.
Yeah, their biology. And that seems like a new enlightened approach.
It does.
Right.
It does.
Like we're really trying to understand them.
Yeah. But Foucault's argument is that this new knowledge wasn't neutral.
Okay.
It had a direct impact on how criminals were treated and controlled.
Right.
Think new institutions like prisons, designed for rehabilitation, new forms of intervention, like therapy.
So like scientific knowledge, while seeming objective, actually gave more power to the authorities.
That's right.
In charge of like managing these
it's a key
individuals.
From Foucault.
Okay.
And he's not saying that it was like some deliberate conspiracy.
Right.
But rather highlighting how knowledge, even with good intentions
Right.
can actually end up strengthening existing power structures.
It makes me think about, like, all the data and, like, algorithms that we have today.
Totally.
Like, all this information
Yes.
about, like, our online behavior, our purchases, our connections is being used to create, like, these profiles and predictions.
Yeah, it's a perfect example.
About who we are and what we'll do.
Of how Foucault's ideas about power and knowledge are even more relevant in the digital age, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's raising all these questions about like privacy and autonomy and the potential for manipulation.
Absolutely.
It's almost like we're creating a system where knowledge about us translates into power over us.
Right.
Which is pretty unsettling.
It is, yeah.
When you think about it.
Yeah, and that brings us to another kind of unsettling concept from Foucault.
Yeah.
Normalizing judgment.
Normalizing judgment. Now what?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty intense. Like what?
Yeah. So
what does that even mean?
It's a key feature of disciplinary power.
Okay.
Right? So it's this process of constantly assessing and categorizing individuals according to a set of norms or standards.
So we're constantly being measured against, like, some invisible yardstick.
Yes.
Whether it's our grades, our performance at work.
Right.
Even, like, how many likes we get online.
Yeah, and the truly insidious part is that this process of normalization often becomes internalized.
Right.
Right. So we start to police ourselves,
right,
striving to conform to these norms, and feeling ashamed or inadequate when we don't measure up.
It's like we become our own, like, prison wardens in a way.
Right. Exactly.
Constantly monitoring and disciplining ourselves to, like, fit in.
Yeah.
But doesn't that, like, stifle like individuality?
That was a major concern for Foucault.
Yeah.
Right? He worried about the homogenizing effects of disciplinary power and how it could lead to kind of this docile conformity that would undermine our capacity for critical thinking and resistance.
Okay, so how do we, like,
so it's
break free from these, like, invisible bars?
Right. Yeah, that's the question, right?
Is there any way to resist this?
And Foucault
normalizing judgment
didn't offer easy answers or simple solutions.
Okay.
Right? He believed that power is pervasive and resistance is difficult, but he also saw resistance as essential.
Okay, so it's not about, like, overthrowing the system.
It's not about some grand revolution.
Yeah, but it's about like finding ways to
challenge it.
A defiance about recognizing these mechanisms of power and finding ways to disrupt them in our everyday lives. It makes me think of that quote that's often attributed to Margaret Mead. You know, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
Right.
Maybe that's, like,
I love that quote.
What resistance looks like in the face of these.
I think that's a beautiful way
systems of control
to put it. Individual acts of resistance, when multiplied, can have a ripple effect, contributing to larger shifts. In power dynamics, it's about recognizing that power is never absolute.
Right.
It's constantly being negotiated and contested.
This has been an intense, but, like,
it has
incredibly thought-provoking.
It has.
Like, third, I guess, of this deep dive.
This deep dive,
Foucault's ideas are challenging.
It are.
But they're so relevant.
But incredibly relevant.
To our world today. Modern world. I can't wait to delve into the final part of Discipline and Punish and see where it all leads.
Absolutely. Me too.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
In our deep dive into Discipline and Punish. You know, from public executions to the panopticon, from the rise of discipline to this idea of normalizing judgment. I mean, it's clear that Foucault was grappling with some really complex ideas about power.
Absolutely.
And as we kind of wrap up our exploration of this book, it's important to, like, pull all these threads together. And see what it all means. You know, not just for understanding, like, history, but for understanding our own lives today.
Absolutely. And I think,
Yeah.
As we kind of bring this to a close, it's important to, like you said, try to synthesize all this stuff.
Right, because this isn't just some like academic exercise.
Not at all. Right.
Foucault's ideas have like real world
implications.
Yeah. So if we had to like boil it all down, like what's the
core message?
Takeaway?
Yeah.
What's the like core message that
What's he trying to convey?
Foucault's trying to convey?
I think at its heart,
yeah.
Discipline and punish is an argument about the relationship between punishment and power.
Okay.
Right. So Foucault is saying that punishment isn't simply about punishing wrongdoing.
Right.
It's about shaping individuals, controlling populations, maintaining social order.
Okay.
And a lot of this control is achieved through these subtle, almost invisible mechanisms of discipline.
Right. So it's not just about like literal prisons.
It's not about
and punishments anymore. Yeah. Right? It's about how these it's
these systems and institutions. Right.
These norms, these
norms and expectations
like shape our
behavior
and even
our
sense of self.
Yeah. Think about the pressure to be productive.
Right.
To conform.
Yeah.
To constantly compare ourselves to others.
Yeah. I mean, it could feel.
Right. These are all signs of disciplinary power at work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
To be honest, like if we're all, kind of caught in this web of disciplinary power.
Right.
Is there any hope for like
is there
resistance?
Way out.
Yeah. Can we break free from these these
invisible chains?
Yeah, invisible chains. That
I mean that's the question, isn't it?
Foucault describes. Yeah.
Foucault himself was, I think, somewhat pessimistic about easy solutions.
Yeah.
Right. He believed that power is always present, always operating.
Yeah.
And that makes resistance incredibly difficult. Yeah. But he also saw resistance as essential.
Okay, so it's not about this grand revolution or something.
No, it's not about
but it's about these
grand revolution. It's about
smaller acts of
defiance.
Yeah, defiance, about recognizing these mechanisms of power.
And
finding ways to
disrupt them.
Yeah,
in our everyday lives.
Okay.
Right.
That makes me think about that Margaret Mead quote. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has.
I love that quote.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what resistance looks like.
Yeah.
In the face of these.
I think that's a beautiful
questions of control.
It's these small individual acts of resistance that when multiplied can actually have a ripple effect and contribute to larger shifts in power dynamics.
Right, and it's about recognizing that power is
never absolute.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. It's constantly being negotiated and contested.
This has been an intense,
it has,
but incredibly thought-provoking deep dive. Thank you so much for taking this journey with us.
Great.
Into the world of Foucault's discipline and punish.
Yeah, I hope our listeners will.
I hope that
continue to explore.
Everyone listening will
these ideas.
Kind of take these ideas and see how they
resonate in their own lives.
Yeah. And here's a final thought to leave you with.
Okay.
Take some time to reflect on how disciplinary power might be operating in your own life.
Right.
Where do you feel the pressure to conform? What are the unspoken rules that you live by? Good question.
And what are the small acts of resistance that you can engage in to carve out spaces for greater freedom?
For greater freedom and authenticity.
Right. Because I think,
even small
acts of defiance can make a difference.
Totally.
By questioning assumptions, challenging norms, refusing to be completely defined by these systems. I think we can create a world where power is more evenly distributed.
Absolutely.
And individual expression. Is truly valued.
That's a
powerful note
to end on.
Yeah. So until next time.
Yeah.
Keep learning.
Keep questioning.
Keep resisting.
Keep resisting.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Sounds good.